I want to give you a hypothetical scenario. Let's say that you buy a television off of Facebook Marketplace. Maybe you want something on the cheap for an extra screen. I know I've done that many times, so I can watch all the games at once. Anyways, you buy the TV from the person. Everything looks good, the screen's in good condition, it's exactly as advertised, and you give the money to the person as part of the sale. You even have the TV in your place for a week, you watch the games on it, and it seems like everything is going well. Then, during one of the games that you're watching, your team does something really stupid, or the team that you bet money on just lost the game, and you're furious, and because you can't control your anger, you decide to throw something, and sure enough, it breaks the TV. This is 1 week after buying the TV on Facebook Marketplace, and now it's busted, even though it was entirely your own doing, seeing as it passed your initial inspection and you used it. So you go back to that person's house and say, listen, you have to take back your TV. I have to nullify this agreement. The TV was broken all along. Obviously, that guy is going to look at you like you have 5 heads and be like, what the heck are you talking about? You agreed to take the TV. You said the TV was fine. You used the TV all week and had no issues. You then broke the TV, and now I'm responsible and have to take it back? No chance. Something like that would seem absolutely insane, right? Well, I bring that up because the man who's been watching this entire time is Buffalo Bills running back Curtis Brown. And in 1983, that's exactly what happened. We've seen plenty of trades across the National Football League get rescinded due to a failed physical. That is not uncommon in the slightest bit. Team A trades a player to Team B in exchange for some sort of compensation, whether it's a draft pick or another player. But 1 day later, something comes up in the physical that sounds the alarm bells for the doctors and the medical staff, and the trade gets called off. But what happens if a player gets traded, passes the initial physical, goes to that team, practices a bit, plays in a game, and then gets injured, and the team wants to rescind the trade? Well, that's exactly what happened when it came to this man in Curtis Brown. And more than 40 years later, it deserves a deep dive today for just how bizarre it was. Because this is the story behind Curtis Brown, and what might just be, considering the circumstances, the weirdest trade in Pittsburgh Steelers history. Make sure you hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel. Because we post every single day on here about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL with stories like this one that you may not have heard of before. So if you like that sort of stuff and you want to learn more, then this is definitely the place for you. Thanks in advance for liking and subscribing and for helping us grow this community. And with that in mind, let's talk about what Brown couldn't do for you, as in void a perfectly reasonable trade. Before I talk about the actual trade in question, we need some context to understand just who Curtis Brown was, how good of a player he was, and why the trade was made in the first place. Brown was drafted by the Bills in the 3rd round of the 1977 NFL Draft, with the Missouri running back being one of the many taken in that insanely talented draft class at that position, including guys like Hall of Famer Tony Dorsett, Wilbur Montgomery, Wendell Tyler, Ricky Bell, Pete Johnson, Terdell Middleton, and Rob Carpenter, just to name a few. Seriously, if you were drafting a running back and needed someone at that position, 1977 was a heck of a year to get your man. And Brown definitely had his moments across his first 6 seasons with the Bills. In 1979, despite a huge fumbling issue, he had nearly 1,000 yards from scrimmage and led the Bills in rushing yards. He scored 2 rushing touchdowns in a huge win against the New York Giants during the 1978 season, being an absolute menace down by the goal line. During the 1980 season, when the Bills shocked a lot of people by making it to the playoffs and winning the AFC East for the first time since the merger, Brown scored 3 touchdowns, with all 3 coming in winning efforts, and 2 of them even being the go-ahead score to give Buffalo the win. And in 1982, he was the 3rd leading rusher on a team that finished 1st in the league in rushing yards, as he averaged over 4.5 yards per carry whenever Joe Cribbs or Roosevelt Weeks needed a break. In other words, Brown was a very productive pick, and for a 3rd rounder, You could do a heck of a lot worse. I'll put it that way. However, by 1983, the writing was on the wall with Brown for a few reasons. Number one, there was a new sheriff in town, as after Chuck Knox was relieved of his duties following a disappointing strike-shortened 1982 season, where the Bills completely collapsed down the stretch, he was replaced by Case Stevenson, who had no ties to Brown whatsoever. Yes, Stevenson was on the Bills' coaching staff throughout all of this, and was the quarterback's coach under Knox in Buffalo from 1978 to 1982. But just because you're the quarterback's coach doesn't mean you have any say in who the running backs on your team are going to be and how they're utilized. When a new coach comes in, everyone's playing for their jobs to try and make a good first impression. And it didn't seem like Brown was in Stevenson's plans at all. Number two, the Bills seemed on paper like they had a lot of good options at running back. And even if Stevenson liked Brown, it was a numbers game. You had Booker Moore, who was drafted by the Bills in the first round of the 1981 NFL Draft. He turned out to be one of the biggest busts in franchise history when all was said and done, as he only finished his NFL career with 420 rushing yards and 1 rushing touchdown. But the Bills were still banking on his potential and banking on him showing off why he was a first-round pick. You had Joe Cribbs, who made it to the Pro Bowl in 1980 and 1981, and during the strike-shortened season in 1982, led the NFL in rushing yards per game, when he averaged over 90 per game. Cribbs had finished inside the top 6 of the NFL in 2 of his first 3 seasons in the league, and obviously, he was taking a bulk of the carries. And you also had Roosevelt Leaks, who finished the 1982 season inside the top 10 of the NFL in rushing touchdowns. If Leaks and Cribbs were both healthy, and the season was a 16-game season, the two men would have combined for nearly 2,200 rushing yards. Buffalo had the number 1 ground game in 1982, and there was no way that Brown was going to get a lot of touches in this offense. And number 3, even if Brown had a chance to take reps away from Cribbs, Leaks, and Moore, Brown had some issues being on the field, as if the best ability a player can have is availability, Brown definitely did not possess that. He missed some time in training camp due to swelling in his right knee. As Stevenson said, he's got a little fluid there. Every training camp lately, it seems to happen after Kurt's been through 2 or 3 days of two-a-days, and we have to take it a little easy on him. You get the idea. Brown had an uphill climb to make it onto the roster, and even if he had spent the last 6 seasons with Buffalo, the odds were slim that he was going to spend a 7th. However, while the Bills didn't really see a need for him considering their situation, there was another team in the AFC that absolutely did. One man's trash is another man's treasure, and that team was the Pittsburgh Steelers, who for the first time since 1973 decided to trade away a draft pick for a player. Seriously, it had been over a decade since the Steelers traded a draft pick for a player, but they didn't think they had too many other options, seeing as their running back room was extremely thin after Russell Davis was diagnosed with a rare blood disorder that would make him unable to run with the ball for all of the 1983 season, and as we would later discover, would make him unable to play in the NFL ever again after 1983. The Bills had a surplus of backs, and the Steelers had a shortage of backs, so the two sides were completely natural trading partners. The deal was simple. The Bills would receive a draft pick if and only if Brown made it onto the roster. If he didn't, the Bills would get nothing. If he did, the Steelers fork over a draft pick. Perfectly reasonable trade, and something that you see a lot of today, where a conditional pick is awarded. I should note that one of Brown's best games as a Bill came in 1980 against the Pittsburgh Steelers, in a game which the Bills won 28-13, and Brown had 66 rushing yards and a touchdown on nearly 5 yards per carry. As Steelers head coach Chuck Noll said on the trade, "He's played well against us. He caught a little hook pass and ran through our whole defense. We've liked him for a long time, and he was available." And as Dick Haley, the director of player personnel for the Steelers, said on the move, "He has done well against us in every game. This guy we have watched since college, and we wanted to draft him then. He's a good football player. He's an in-between size, he's got a good attitude, and he's a good worker. So that should be the end of this saga, right? Curtis Brown gets traded from the Bills to the Steelers, and the Bills never have to worry about the man again. Brown passed his physical with the Steelers, was practicing with the team, and even played for the Steelers in their preseason game against the Dallas Cowboys, a 24-7 win where he had 3 carries for 18 yards. At this point, it's extremely clear that Brown is the property of the Steelers. Brown belongs to Pittsburgh. It's like if you have a cleaning service, they clean the place, and then a week later, you spill a bunch of soda on the couch and you blame the cleaning service for it. That is very clearly not a part of their job description, and their time had passed. Buffalo's time with Curtis Brown had passed. Everything at this point after the physical, after him participate in practice, and after having him play in a freaking game especially, is entirely on the Steelers. However, after Brown was apparently having some issues with his knee after the game, the Steelers very quickly realized, yeah, this isn't going to work. We need a running back who can stay healthy, considering how depleted our running back room is. And Brown being hurt doesn't help us. So they decided to do what any reasonable team would do in that situation. They sent him back to Buffalo. Or at least, they attempted to send him back to Buffalo. Pittsburgh didn't have to owe Buffalo anything. Again, the condition for the trade was whether or not Brown was a part of the active roster by the start of the regular season. So the fact that Buffalo was not going to get a pick out of this isn't controversial, nor is it an attempted swindle on the part of the Steelers. But they tried to send Brown back to Buffalo and nullify the entire deal under the logic of the Bills sold us damaged goods. And you can imagine what the Bills were thinking when the Steelers tried to pull this off. What are you, crazy? He's yours. We're not taking him back. You can cut him if you want, but we're not bringing him back. There is no way we're getting rid of a player on our roster to make room for Brown, who we made very clear that we don't want when you already took him on. As Norm Pollum, the vice president of player personnel for the Bills, said on what the Steelers were trying to do, Curtis became the property of the Pittsburgh Steelers upon joining their team. There's no way he can revert back to us under the acquisition rules of the National Football League. Translation, nice try, Steelers. When you accepted the trade, he became yours. When you had him practice and played him in a game, meaning that he literally suited up in a Steeler uniform and accumulated stats as a Steeler, he became yours. He's not ours, and we want nothing to do with him whatsoever. The precedent that this would set, if he did end up reverting back to the Bills, would be insane, because vice versa, the Bills could void the trade a week later for some other reason. Pollum continued, saying, Brown still passed the Steelers' physical and played in their game. As far as I'm concerned, he is their property. They can do whatever they want with him, but the conditions of the trade don't say that he has to revert to us. In other words, you can cut him, you can keep him, you can trade him to another team yourself, but leave us out of this. We wiped our hands clean of Brown when we traded him to you. He's not ours anymore. That's in the past. We want nothing to do with him. Unsurprisingly, the Steelers, upon realizing that the Bills were not going to take him back because that literally could not happen, ended up cutting the man, with Curtis Brown becoming a free agent, able to sign anywhere with any team who knew of his health issues. And unsurprisingly, Brown didn't do much else after that. He signed midway through the season with the Houston Oilers, who just needed any bodies at this point, seeing as they were 0-8 at the time he was signed and would finish the season with an abysmal 2-14 record. Brown played 2 games for the Oilers, carrying the ball 2 times in an overtime loss to the Cleveland Browns for -1 yards, and carrying the ball once in a 55-14 loss to the Cincinnati Bengals, scoring a Chris Paul touchdown, as his 1 yard late in the fourth quarter helped trim what was, at the time, a 55-7 deficit. Brown never played in the NFL again after that 1983 season, and oddly enough, I guess you can say he's one of a few players whose final carry in the NFL was a touchdown. So he's got that going for him at least, as insignificant as that touchdown was. By the time Brown's career ended, the former third rounder had 2,171 rushing yards and 9 rushing touchdowns, none of which came as a member of the Pittsburgh Steelers. But let this Curtis Brown trade debacle serve as a reminder for every NFL team out there, and just as a general life lesson. If you make a trade for something, you agree to the trade, you inspect the object or the person acquired in the trade and find nothing at fault, you praise the object or the person acquired in the trade and talk about how great it is, or he is, you use the object or person acquired in the trade for a decent period of time, including a high-risk activity, and then you decide that you want to avoid the trade, call it off, and return it because the seller sold you damaged goods? That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works. Curtis Brown only carried the ball for the Bills and the Oilers, but all these years later, he might be best remembered for his time with the Steelers, a team he never carried the ball with in a regular season game, but a team that had him in the center of an insanely dumb controversy. Because in 1983, leave it to a team named the Steelers to learn about the concept of takebacks. Check out our live streaming schedule for the next few days. We're live every single day on this channel, whether we're covering a sporting event or playing GeoGuessr or just taking your requests. So make sure you like and subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single time that we go live and so that you can join this community. Also, thanks to all our members and our Patreon supporters who get exclusive perks like their name at the end of each video, members-only Q&A streams, and cool emojis to use on videos and during streams. See how you can join this community and become a member or a Patreon member by clicking the link in the description below.